There are battles you never thought you'd have to fight, wars not of nations or armies, but of spirits, words, and invisible chains. For many of you listening, this isn't just a metaphor. You've lived through it. You've known the kind of relationship that begins with charm and ends with control. You've tasted that subtle poison of being constantly blamed, twisted, and diminished, until your reflection in the mirror felt foreign. What you were facing was never merely psychological, it was spiritual. The narcissist's hold over your life was not simply human manipulation, it was a demonic counterfeit of divine authority. It sought to enthrone itself, where only God belongs, in your mind, your peace, your sense of worth, and your moral center. And so, when God begins to intervene, it doesn't start gently. He doesn't negotiate with darkness. He tears it apart. He shakes the very ground beneath your false attachments, exposing what's been masquerading as love, loyalty, or even destiny. And if you are seeing these signs, it may mean heaven has already declared war on your bondage. Today, we are going to walk through 4 signs that the spiritual siege is breaking, 5 moments when the demonic grip of the narcissist begins to lose its power because God has taken command of the battle. These are not coincidences, they are signals of divine warfare. And as you hear them, I want you to remember this truth. You are not losing your mind, you are watching evil lose its ground. Sign 1, the intensified storm. When God begins to dismantle the narcissist's demonic hold on your life, the first sign is not calm, it is not peace, it is not relief. It is a storm, one so violent that it seems to contradict the very idea of divine rescue. The human heart expects deliverance to come quietly, wrapped in serenity, like a gentle dawn after a long night. But God's deliverance often begins with thunder. It begins when the false order collapses, when the kingdom of manipulation begins to tremble under the weight of divine justice. What you interpret as chaos may, in truth, be the sound of chains breaking in the unseen world. This is the moment when everything intensifies: the narcissist's rage, their accusations, their cruelty, even your own confusion. You feel as if the ground beneath you is splitting apart. The familiar patterns that once defined the relationship, the pleading, the guilt, the self-blame, start to lose their power, and the demonic spirit that operated through them begins to panic. You are no longer fully under its spell, and it knows it. Darkness always grows loudest when it senses eviction. What was once subtle becomes grotesque. What was once emotional manipulation now feels like open spiritual warfare. You start to see it, feel it, sense it in the air, and it unnerves you. But that recognition is not a curse, it is a sign. You are standing in the doorway of deliverance, and the enemy is throwing a tantrum on his way out. You must understand that the demonic does not release its prey willingly. When God moves to reclaim a soul, there is always resistance. Think of Israel leaving Egypt the moment before freedom came. Pharaoh's heart hardened one last time. He chased them into the sea, not realizing he was running into his own destruction. The narcissist's renewed cruelty is often just that, the last chase. Their control is slipping, and instead of repenting, they fight harder. But God is already in motion. The storm that frightens you is, in truth, God's wind tearing down what enslaved you. It is in this season that many believers misinterpret the warfare. They think, if things are getting worse, maybe God isn't with me. But in the language of heaven, worsening circumstances often mean the breaking point is near. A birth always begins with pain. The pressure you feel is not the end, it's the contraction of deliverance. The narcissist's fury is not a sign of their victory, but of their defeat. Their words grow sharper because they can no longer reach the places of your heart they once inhabited. Their manipulation grows desperate because its power is fading. What you're witnessing is not the continuation of control, but its collapse. And yet, the storm is real. The confusion, the emotional exhaustion, the nights when you question everything, they are not illusions. But here lies the mystery. God does not always calm the storm immediately. Sometimes he stands with you inside it until you learn who he is. Remember what Jesus did with the disciples. He allowed the winds to rise before he spoke, "Peace, be still." It was not to frighten them, but to teach them that divine authority is not proven by the absence of the storm, but by power within it. You may think you're breaking apart, but God is actually breaking through. He is confronting the demonic hold, not by negotiation, but by force. The trembling you feel is heaven invading territory long occupied by darkness. And so, when the narcissist grows unpredictable, when their words slice through your calm, when confusion rises like a fog around your mind, resist the temptation to see it as regression. It may be your exodus. God often disturbs before he delivers. The shaking you feel in your spirit is his rearranging of foundations. Every attack, every outburst, every desperate act from the narcissist is proof that something divine is happening beyond the visible realm. You are not losing control, the enemy is. The storm is not punishment, it is proof that heaven has intervened. C.S. Lewis once wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. And indeed, sometimes the storm is God shouting, "I am here. I am tearing this apart, so that you may live." There are times when the only way for God to deliver you from deception is to let the mask fall completely. The narcissist's darkness must become undeniable for you to stop justifying it. The storm strips illusions. It exposes evil in its raw form. You see the monster behind the smile, the manipulation behind the kindness, the control behind the love. It is painful, but it is purifying. So when everything begins to crumble, when your tears become prayers and your strength becomes surrender, know that you are not being abandoned. You are being rescued. The wind that terrifies you is also the breath of God, blowing open your prison. The storm, though violent, is sacred. For in that chaos, heaven is dismantling hell's architecture around your soul. You are not being destroyed, you are being delivered. And sometimes, deliverance doesn't look like light descending, it looks like darkness breaking apart under divine command. And when the first sign appears, when the narcissist's grip tightens as God begins to pull you free, remember this truth. Storms don't mean you're far from freedom. They mean freedom is close enough to provoke hell itself. Sign 2, the supernatural peace. There comes a moment in every battle between light and darkness when the noise begins to fade, not because the war is over, but because heaven itself has entered the field. After the shouting, after the tears, after the endless questions that haunted your mind, there is suddenly stillness. You don't know when it arrived, and you can't explain why, but something inside you has quieted. It's not the kind of calm that follows understanding, it's the kind that follows divine intervention. You realize, somehow, that the chaos no longer has authority over you. This peace does not make sense to the logical mind. It does not appear because the narcissist stopped attacking or because life has become simple again. No, it arrives in defiance of your reality. It descends in the middle of your confusion when nothing around you has changed. And yet, deep within, there's a sacred certainty that you are no longer trapped in the same prison. This is the second sign. God is breaking the demonic hold the narcissist had on your spirit, and you are beginning to breathe heaven's air again. At first, it may feel strange, almost empty. You spent so long surviving on high alert that peace feels like silence in a room that once screamed. You look around, expecting another attack, another cruel twist of manipulation. But none comes. You start to notice the distance growing between their voice and your reaction. You hear their words, but they no longer pierce. You remember their gaze, but it no longer freezes you. It's as though their power dissolved quietly overnight. The chains are still lying on the floor, but they are no longer around your wrists. That is what divine peace feels like. Not a soft escape, but a shift in atmosphere. It is the soul finally remembering its authority. For years, you were convinced that safety meant controlling the narcissist's behavior, keeping them calm, managing their moods, predicting their storms. But true safety was never found in control, it was found in surrender. And now that you've released the fight to God, He has filled the space with something unshakable. The same heart that once trembled with fear now beats with the rhythm of peace that cannot be stolen. This peace does not erase the memories. You may still wake up in the night, remembering the manipulation, the silent treatment, the blame. But instead of drowning in it, you find yourself floating above it, as though your soul refuses to sink anymore. The pain that once consumed you has become evidence of how deeply you endured and how powerfully you are being remade. This is what healing truly feels like, not the absence of the wound, but the presence of God within it. Peace is not weakness, it is not indifference, it is the quiet power that comes from knowing you are no longer fighting alone. When you used to face the narcissist, you felt small, unheard, easily shattered. But now, something eternal has taken residence inside you. You speak less, yet your silence holds weight. You no longer rush to defend yourself, yet truth stands around you like armor. You look at the narcissist's rage, and instead of fear, you feel compassion, not sympathy for their cruelty, but understanding that their chaos no longer belongs to you. Their darkness cannot enter the light you carry now. And perhaps that is the true miracle, not that the narcissist changed, but that you did. You stopped dancing to their rhythm. You stopped allowing their perception to dictate your identity. You discovered that peace is not the prize you earn after the war, it's the weapon that ends it. It is the declaration that you will no longer feed what tried to destroy you. That realization breaks hell's last chain, because demonic control requires participation, and when you refuse to play the game collapses. This kind of peace is not quiet resignation, it is spiritual authority. It is the awareness that even in your vulnerability, you are protected. That even when your mind still trembles, your spirit stands firm. The narcissist can scream, accuse, or vanish into their illusions, but their noise cannot touch the ground of your being anymore. You have entered a different frequency, one that darkness cannot imitate. And as this peace deepens, you will sense something extraordinary. The atmosphere of your life is shifting. Where there used to be tension, there is now clarity. Where anxiety once lived, there is expectancy. The silence that once terrified you now feels sacred. You begin to understand, not with your intellect, but with your spirit, that God is no longer just rescuing you. He is reoccupying the territory of your soul. When peace begins to feel supernatural, it is because heaven has declared ownership. The narcissist's hold has been severed. The demonic energy that thrived in confusion can no longer breathe in the purity of your stillness. You are standing in the eye of the storm, but this time the storm cannot touch you. That is how you know the power has shifted. So when you find yourself feeling calm in places that once made you tremble, do not doubt it, do not question the silence. This peace is not emptiness, it is evidence. It is proof that the darkness is losing its grip, that the spiritual atmosphere around you is being rewritten by divine hands. You are not escaping, you are evolving. And the calm you feel is heaven's way of saying the war for your soul is being won. Sign 3. The spiritual clarity. There comes a moment when your vision begins to change. The fog that once wrapped itself around your thoughts begins to lift, and suddenly you start to see with eyes you didn't know you had. This clarity is not intellectual, it is spiritual. It's the kind of sight that comes after tears have washed away illusion. It's the moment when you realize that what you thought was love was control, what you called loyalty was bondage, and what you mistook for compassion was manipulation. And when that realization dawns, something inside you rises not in anger, but in truth. That is the third sign. God is breaking the narcissist's demonic hold by opening your spiritual eyes. For so long, you lived inside their version of reality. You believed what they told you about yourself. You accepted their definitions of good and bad, worthy and unworthy, success and failure. You learned to measure your peace by their moods and your worth by their approval. They built a house of mirrors around your soul, and you lived inside the reflections, never realizing how distorted they were. But now, those mirrors are cracking. The illusion that once felt so powerful is shattering under the weight of divine light, and you can finally see what was true all along. You were never the broken one. You were simply surrounded by deception. This clarity is painful at first, because with it comes grief. Grief for the years you lost, trying to make sense of the senseless. You remember all the times you apologized for things you didn't do, believed lies you didn't deserve, and stayed silent when you should have spoken. You begin to see how deeply the manipulation went, not just in words, but in energy, in timing, in tone, in the way they made you doubt your own soul. The truth feels sharp at first, but it's the kind of pain that cuts you free. Every revelation slices through a cord that once bound your identity to their control. It's in this season that God teaches you the sacred difference between seeing and understanding. Seeing shows you what is happening, understanding shows you why. And when divine understanding begins to unfold, you realize that what the narcissist meant for destruction, to heaven allowed for your awakening. Every betrayal that once broke you became a lesson in discernment. Every lie that once confused you trained your spirit to recognize truth by contrast. You start to thank God for the blindness, because without it, you would never have learned how to see. This is where your spiritual senses awaken. You begin to notice energy before words. You discern intention before action. You sense manipulation, not through logic, but through vibration. Your soul now responds to what once deceived your mind. You can walk into a room and feel the difference between peace and poison, between light and darkness. That is not paranoia, that is discernment. It is the mark of one who has been in spiritual warfare and has survived with sensitivity sharpened by experience. The narcissist's power was built on confusion. As long as you doubted your perception, they could control your response. But once you see clearly, their kingdom collapses. You begin to spot their patterns before they even play out. The false charm no longer enchants you. The guilt trips no longer hook you. You watch the performance, but your soul stays seated. You recognize that what once felt supernatural about them was never divine. It was manipulation wrapped in charisma. Now that you see the machinery behind the illusion, the spell breaks. But spiritual clarity doesn't just reveal the darkness in others, it also reveals the light in you. You begin to recognize how much divine power has always lived in your spirit, waiting for this moment. You see the purpose behind your endurance. You see the wisdom born from your pain. You see that the narcissist's control could never truly erase your essence. It could only delay your awakening. This revelation becomes your strength. You stop trying to fix others and start guarding your peace. You stop explaining your boundaries and start embodying them. You stop looking for validation and start walking in truth. Clarity brings separation. As your vision sharpens, you will notice that some people who once felt familiar now feel foreign. The same conversations that once comforted you now drain you. The same environments that once felt safe now feel suffocating. Do not fear this. It's not isolation, it's purification. God is filtering your surroundings to match your new sight. Those who were never meant to walk in your next season will fade quietly, and those who carry the same light will be drawn to you naturally. You are being positioned among the awakened. Clarity changes everything. It changes how you pray, how you love, how you listen. It changes the way you see your past, not as a story of failure, but as the soil where discernment was planted. And most importantly, it changes how you see God. You no longer picture him as distant, watching from above. You begin to feel him as present, guiding from within. Every insight you gain feels like a divine conversation, not information, but communion. And in that sacred exchange, you realize the truth. You were never fighting the narcissist alone. God was there, teaching you how to see, how to know, how to walk by revelation instead of reaction. When clarity comes, it feels like light returning to a house that's been dark for years. Dust dances in the air, and for the first time, you can see the corners of your soul. You don't just clean them, you reclaim them. You start rebuilding your life with the same hands that once trembled in fear. And each step forward becomes an act of worship, for sight itself has become sacred. You can finally see what the darkness tried so hard to hide, that you were chosen not just to survive the narcissist, but to outgrow their world completely. Sign 4. The return of power. After the fog lifts, and your eyes finally see the truth, there comes a still, sacred moment. A moment when you realize that what was stolen from you is beginning to return. Not in the form of revenge, not through noise or confrontation, but as a quiet power rising from within. This is the fourth sign that God is breaking the narcissist's demonic hold, the return of your spiritual authority. For years, you may have lived as if you were powerless, silenced, dismissed, and drained. You gave everything, your empathy, your time, your energy, your prayers. You poured yourself out, trying to love someone who only fed on that love to strengthen their illusion of control. Every time you tried to stand up, guilt pushed you down. Every time you tried to speak, confusion wrapped around your words. You thought you were weak. But now, you see that was never weakness. That was warfare. The narcissist's control wasn't physical, it was energetic. They operated in a spiritual economy of exchange, feeding off your peace, drawing life from your attention, using your empathy as a doorway to your energy. They kept you emotionally bankrupt, so you could never afford to rise. But God has stepped into the scene, and the divine balance is shifting. What they took through deception, heaven is returning through revelation. You begin to feel strength where you once felt despair. Your emotions, once tangled in chaos, start to align. You no longer react to their provocations, because your peace has become your power. What used to drain you now teaches you. What once frightened you now exposes itself as small and hollow. The narcissist's shadow begins to shrink because it can no longer stand under the light you carry. This power doesn't roar, it radiates. It is quiet but unshakable. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to prove itself because it knows where it came from. It comes from the realization that you were never dependent on the narcissist's approval. You were dependent on God's grace. The moment that truth settles into your spirit, the demonic hold loses its grip completely. Power, in its purest form, is not domination, it is alignment. When your will, your purpose, and your peace come back into agreement with God's truth, you become immovable, and that is precisely what terrifies the narcissist and the forces that fuel them. Because as long as they could make you react, they could control your energy. But once you stop reacting and start discerning, they lose access. Your silence becomes thunder in the spirit. Your calm becomes warfare. Your boundaries become holy ground. You start to notice how your body, your emotions, and your surroundings begin to respond to this shift. The same situations that once caused anxiety now feel different. You stand taller. Your breathing deepens. Your voice grows steadier. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You feel anchored, as though heaven itself is stabilizing your heart. You're not trying to be strong anymore, you simply are. And here's the sacred mystery. When God restores your power, He doesn't just return what you lost, He multiplies it. Every tear you cried becomes oil for your anointing. Every sleepless night becomes wisdom. Every wound turns into discernment. The pain that once weakened you now fuels your authority, because you have walked through fire and didn't burn. You have faced deception and didn't lose your faith. You have been betrayed, but you did not become bitter. That endurance becomes your crown. It is at this stage that you start to realize why God allowed certain things to happen, not because he wanted to see you suffer, but because he was training your spirit for rulership. You cannot lead in the light until you've learned to stand firm in the dark. And so, he allowed the narcissist to test your boundaries, not to destroy you, but to reveal what needed healing inside you. Every manipulation became a mirror, reflecting where your faith still depended on human approval. And when you saw that truth, and chose to trust God instead, your soul reclaimed its territory. You are no longer afraid of confrontation, because you understand that confrontation is not always conflict. Sometimes it's clarity. You no longer feel obligated to explain your worth to anyone, because your worth was never up for debate. You don't beg for peace anymore. You become peace. That is what divine power looks like in human form, not arrogance, not self-righteousness, but a settled confidence in who you are and whose you are. The narcissist senses it too. They may not say it, but they feel it. The way your energy no longer bends to their chaos, the way your spirit no longer vibrates with fear. They may try to provoke you again, to test if the door is still open, but when they do, they find something terrifying. Silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of authority. You no longer answer manipulation with emotion, you answer it with presence. That presence is God through you, steady, sovereign, unbothered. This is what it means when Scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is not passivity, it is spiritual dominion. It's the posture of someone who no longer fights for victory, but from victory. You are not battling to be free anymore, you are learning how to live as free. And every time you choose peace over panic, boundaries over guilt, truth over illusion, heaven applauds. Power returns gradually, like dawn breaking after a long night. You may not even notice it at first. It shows up in small ways, the way you say no without trembling, the way you walk away without needing to justify, the way you look at the same person who once crushed your spirit and feel nothing. That nothingness is not numbness, it's freedom, the absence of attachment to what once defined you. Soon, you'll realize that the power you've reclaimed is not just for yourself, it's for others still trapped in the same darkness. God restores you, not only to heal you, but to send you. You become a vessel of liberation. Your testimony becomes a weapon against deception. You walk into rooms and bring clarity where confusion ruled. You speak and chains begin to rattle. The same voice the narcissist tried to silence now carries the authority of heaven. And when you finally stand in this power, calm, centered, radiant, you will understand something the narcissist never could. True power never controls, it releases. True strength never dominates, it protects. True authority never demands to be seen, because it already shines. This is what the enemy feared all along, not that you would lose yourself, but that you would find out who you truly are, that you would rise not with anger, but with authority, that you would learn that divine power is not about forcing others to change, but about being unchangeable in the presence of darkness. And that, my friend, is the very moment when God smiles and says, "Now you are free."